We did that in Grenada. It was not like Korea, or it was not like Vietnam. We went in with enough force to win the war militarily, and we did very quickly, and with a minimum loss of life and a minimum of suffering on either side.
Retired Rear Admiral Robert Palmer Mackenzie, who capped his 40-year hitch in the United States Navy as the first commander of the United States forces in the Caribbean, attended the Damon College Forum in the fall of 1984 to emphasize the communist threat in the Caribbean. Admiral Mackenzie, who distinguished himself with service aboard destroyers and aircraft carriers during World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, was the author of President Reagan's Grenada invasion plan.
The plan that we wrote at the headquarters of U.S. Forces Caribbean was part of a series of contingency plans that we write for any given area. We write these for events all over the world. When you have a contingency plan in being, it can then be executed by drafting an operation order. And I think they did it beautifully and conducted a superb military operation and safeguarding the lives of the people and going in and reestablishing order and discipline and bringing stability out of chaos very quickly. That's the way wars should be fought, Fran. You shouldn't fight a war to just establish a neutral position and stay there. You should go in and win it.
Why was the press omitted from the briefing and the actual invasion of Grenada?
Unfortunately, on the first day when he put waves in, we didn't know exactly what kind of opposition they were going to face. So we wanted to get as many military people, fighting military people in there as possible. And so we left the press home the first day. But we brought them in just as soon as we could. We want America to know what's going to happen, but we'd like to have them know the whole truth, not just selected sensationalism that certain members of the media presented to us on Vietnam. There are very fine reporters today that are just as brave and just as honorable as Ernie Pyle was. Unfortunately, there are some that are not quite that honorable, that are exponents of sensationalism. They try and reveal very sensational items instead of reporting the news as it's happening, the facts, the good things as well as the bad things that happen. You know, when the press was finally invited to come in on the next day, the second day, down in Grenada, one of the reporters or one of the photographers took a picture of a Marine pilot, a helicopter pilot, dead on the beach. That young man's parents learned of his death by seeing the picture in the newspaper. How would you feel, Fran? How would you feel if that's the way you learned that a son of yours was killed?
Critics compare the Grenada invasion to the Soviets' invasion of Afghanistan. Now, what's the difference?
Those critics are so stupid that I can't believe it. That is such a ridiculous comparison. In the first place, the Russians went in at the invitation of other communists in that country to come in and firmly put the communists in control. And they came in with massive forces, 100,000 troops, and they're there to this day, in that number of people. Massive numbers, and they have fought the war against the civilians of that country with chemical weapons, with flamethrowers, with every kind of weapon that they had available in their arsenal.
How real is the threat in the Caribbean today, and what must we do to counter that threat?
The Cuban threat, as it sits astride of those very vital sea lanes of communications down there, and those lanes are vital to our country in time of peace or in time of war, they sit astride the entrance and the exits to the Gulf of Mexico. There are two very narrow channels that are there. The Straits of Florida that's just 90 miles across, and the Yucatan Channel that's just 100 miles across. The scenario that bothers me most is one if a NATO war should go in Europe, a conventional war, and Cuba should declare itself neutral. Well, we would send our forces over to fight the war, as we're committed to with our allies in NATO. And then if a week later or 2 weeks later, Cuba declared on the side of the Soviets, they could employ their forces to interdict this flow of material that comes out of the Gulf of Mexico and must pass within 100 miles of the island of Cuba through these two narrow choke points. So what we've got to do is make sure that Castro knows that he would have more to lose in that scenario in the long run than he would have to gain.
What's the bottom line, Admiral, in defusing the Central America time bomb?
Cuba exists as a communist nation today only because the Soviets underwrite that country to the tune of $13 million every day. And it's going to be tough to convince Castro that that would be the wrong move for him to make in the event of a NATO scenario. We would have to divert forces back from Europe to neutralize Cuba in the event of something like that.
And I imagine there are contingency plans such as your Grenada plan just waiting to be put into use.
I can't talk about contingency plans because of the security classification of most of those things, but I think it would be proper to assume that we have contingency plans in being for any important scenario that you might be able to envision.